Hey everyone, you're listening to Green Rapids.
That was perfect.
So good. Welcome, Wendy. Today we have Wendy here.
I am Wendy Randall. I am a longtime resident of Kent County. I am the director of the Kent County Essential Needs Task Force, and I've been in this role for just over 6 years.
Oh, wow.
Did you tell us that the first time we met? 6 years is a good minute.
I don't know.
That is a
But
good
yeah,
amount of time.
it's been a minute. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I had one job for 6 years, and I still have every bit of information from that job in my head. It's just when you do it that long, it just becomes like not who you are, but kind of like everything you do and
Your
know.
expertise, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm a Gen Xer, so I'm one of those who like longevity in the workplace is a really
Yeah.
important value. And so, you know, I had to go through a whole reframing of how I view other people who make lots of job transitions.
Okay.
To recognize that those are growth opportunities,
Yes.
not like job hopping.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate having your perspective of like 6 years is a long time.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting too, because that was such value, is to be somewhere for a long time, and we see it all the time. I mean, some of the people I worked with worked there for 10 to 20 years, and it was a chiropractic office, so it's just being at a place and familiar. So
Yeah.
Cool.
Sometimes, unfortunately, familiarity leads to stagnancy.
Yes.
So it is important to know like when it's the right time to make a transition where the individual can grow and the organization and future organizations can grow as well. So I have a very different perspective on it now than I did when I was like in my 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I can see the commitment to wanting to be a lifer, though, because when I worked at the library, I was like, I'm going to retire out of this place.
I feel like you still have plans to go back and retire.
I kind of do.
And that's okay.
I kind of do.
Someone's
Honestly.
got to do it.
Full
Yeah.
cycle.
Yeah. So I guess what led you into the job that you're in now and maybe made you want to stay for this long period of time besides the security, longevity, things like that?
Yeah, sure. So I had been participating in the Essential Needs Task Force as a representative of Goodwill Industries for a long time. So I was in workforce development at Goodwill for almost 14 years.
Oh, wow.
And through that, yeah, exactly.
We're like,
Through that, we were involved in some different community partnerships. And so I had the pleasure of representing Goodwill at the Essential Needs Task Force Economic and Workforce Development Committee. And really, it really helped ground my concept of collaboration and community voice and those types of really foundational competencies for any type of workforce development or any type of systems work.
Yeah.
So when the opportunity became available, I wanted to get more involved at a systems level.
Nice.
And so it was interesting coming to ENTF because my background was really primarily in workforce development.
Yeah.
And ENTF, of course, has a lot of different system areas that we focus on. So I had a huge learning curve when it came
Sure.
to the food system and the transportation system and the utility system and, you know, just being able to have, I guess, the background of the details of the work, especially service delivery work, but also being able to put that in a higher level system framework
Yeah.
in a sector that I had no familiarity with. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
and in terms of staying with the work, you know, system work is never really finished. And so from the personal perspective, like every day is new, it's challenging and rewarding, and getting to be in really thoughtful conversations around the opportunities that we have as a community, that drives me every single day.
Totally.
I wouldn't want anything different.
Yes, and you get to have those in-depth conversations when you're talking about systems, because the systems are what we have to abide by in order to get what we need and what we want out of our societies. So
Exactly.
being able to like be a part of this task force that's responsible for kind of, I guess, assisting those systems has to feel so good in a different type of way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very different than direct service work. You know, it's not the same as, you know, helping someone find a place to lay their head at night.
Yeah.
But it is about ensuring that there are opportunities for people to have places that are safe and secure, for people to have economic mobility, for people to feel healthy in their community. So it's really looking at like, how do all of our crisis intervention services, but also how do all of our policies fit together so that everyone feels like they're living out their greatest potential.
Yeah. So for our listeners who don't know what the Kent County Essential Needs Task Force is, how would you describe that? Or what is it?
Yeah. So it's
If you can find the words.
It doesn't have to be like a one-liner either. It could
no,
be like
no.
a
It's
several
never
liner.
a one-liner. It's never a one-liner. So Essential Needs Task Force is a convening entity. So we are a group that brings together community organizers, nonprofits, so direct service folks, folks from local government, folks from faith institutions, some business folks, and we wrap our conversations around 5 different systems areas. And within those conversations, we're working on shared visioning. We're working on coordination of services and reducing duplication, filling gaps in services.
Yeah.
And then we're working on shared initiatives so that every organization that's participating is seeing the benefit for not only their organization and the people that they serve, but for the community as a whole.
Okay.
So we're really focusing on interconnectedness of organizations, interconnectedness of services,
Right.
and how can we work together for collective impact rather than individual impact.
Yeah. And we love like collaboration and community and like, you know, just connecting the dots because like everything's like intersectional if you really think about it, right? So I really love that about the Essential Needs Task Force.
Well, and would we all try to address things in the way that maybe works best for only like our group or our organization? We find maybe a little bit of redundancy. Like if we're going to be addressing the same problem as somebody else, maybe we could collaborate, or maybe we could use each
Absolutely.
other's resources or communicate about what the needs of certain residents or just people in general in the city need in order to become a resident, or just whatever it may be.
Yeah, you know, I think what's interesting is we spend a lot of our time introducing organizations or people to one another. And actually, that's one of our core functions. One of our action areas
really?
is
Okay.
connecting.
Yeah.
And part of the reason for that is, you know, how much more effective can we be if we're working together, if we're partnering in some way? And there are some circumstances where nuanced services or nuanced approaches are really important because of a particular cultural competency or because of an identity need, you know, something that's really specific.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if we can partner where it makes sense and become stronger and more effective through that partnership,
Yeah.
then that's the outcome that we're really looking for. So we do a lot of like, we meet someone new and we learn about what they're doing, and then we're like, oh, light bulb, you should be talking to this person and
Yeah.
you should get together with that person, and maybe there are co-location opportunities,
So you
or
get to act
maybe
as like
there
a
are
conduit. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And
So
you're-
that connecting aspect is a really important function of ours.
Okay. And it's cool that that's like a very like you're very intentional about that focus too. Like it's not just like,
Yeah.
oh, we just so happen to be here being conduits. You're just like, no, we're doing this.
Yeah.
Which I really appreciate.
Yeah, when we ask people, like, why do you keep coming back to ENTF meetings? One of the biggest things that we heard was the networking, the connections that I make, the people that I get to know, the relationships that I build. And so, you know, we wanted to leverage that. We wanted to really lean into that.
Yeah. And as you're saying this too, like I'm realizing that there's so many things and there's so many places or resources that I don't know about too. So it's really important to have like a place where people know about resources and they know about community and they know how to get people connected. I think that's a job in itself, just to hold that information and know how to get it to people correctly and properly.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of
like
the
a-
really exciting things that we've developed over time came out of our Workforce Development Committee, and that was the whole concept of resource navigation and case conferencing in order to troubleshoot referrals and barrier resolution.
Yeah.
And so
right.
we have quarterly convenings where we bring together resource navigators from a wide variety of different sectors and talk about a specific system issue. So, for example, they might talk about housing resources, or they might talk
Yeah.
about transportation resources, or they might talk about utilities, you know, but it's the topic areas are identified by the people who are attending those convenings
Yeah.
so that they're able to work with one another and work with the experts on where resources are most accessible or how to navigate those complex systems where eligibility is an issue and timing is an issue and access is an issue.
Yeah.
So having that resource navigation convening, and then we also do trainings around resource navigation as well. Those are
that's
some
awesome.
really, those really have helped help people like case managers or referral specialists become more effective in their jobs.
Absolutely. If they can navigate the systems that they're asking other people to use, or they find out the issues that people are having within them. I mean, I've been talking to a friend about looking for a home, and like even just renting a house can be so complicated. Like I couldn't imagine if I needed to take 10 more steps in order to just get myself or my family into a proper home. So I appreciate that people like specifically take classes to make sure that it's easier when we have to navigate through these systems.
Yeah.
We don't really realize that there's somebody behind the scenes doing all of that. Just why I love these conversations so much, because I don't know.
Yeah, it's cool to just kind of like get more understanding about what goes on behind the scenes,
Yeah.
like in different levels of the system.
Huge part of
So-
organizing that we don't even touch or we don't even understand sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, it's interesting when you think about how resources become available to community. It really took a long time for, I think, funders to understand that infrastructure of how systems work is important in and of itself. You
Yeah.
know, it's not just the direct service delivery that's important when funding something happening in the community.
Right.
It's important to fund that network behind or that support structure behind the services that are being provided.
Right.
And ultimately, we want to get to a point where the services that are provided are less and less necessary, right?
Yes.
Right.
So we have
Preach.
to have these conversations around
Yes.
root causes and systems change. Otherwise, we're just going to be delivering services over and over and over again. And, that's
the
not
nonprofit
effective.
that never ends.
Exactly. Yeah. The nonprofit industrial complex.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then that's
Yeah.
no fun. And it just creates a more exhausted group of people in that workforce as well, because that's just, it's
Yeah.
so much to be seeing the same issues over and over again with only like a Band-Aid.
And it continues to like enable the government to like continue to neglect the people too, because
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't lead to equity.
It doesn't,
just
yeah.
leads to
Sustaining.
a sense of like saviorism, like,
Yeah.
oh, I did a good job because I helped these people. Well, did you change their lives for the future, or did you
Right.
just help them in the instance?
Yeah.
And people need help in the situation. They need help in that crisis
Yes.
moment. They also need to be assured that the system will be restructured so that they don't find themselves in that type of situation again in the future.
Avoid the crisis moment altogether if you
Yeah.
can.
Yeah.
So then the Essential Needs Task Force makes sure that the systems that people are utilizing for these services are not only growing out of these systems and services, but they're easy to use as well.
Yeah, I would say that's fair. We're really looking at how are people accessing information to get the resources that are appropriate for them, and how are we changing the narrative around services and systems, and then how can we hold leaders or people in power accountable?
Yeah.
And how do we hold one another accountable for our own behaviors as well?
Yeah.
We can talk a lot about equity, but are we really living out behaviors that display equity and that
Yeah.
uplift equity? And that's a really important challenge that that we discuss a lot in our committees is, what does it look like to embed equity in our work?
Right.
When we're talking about concepts, we're talking about strategies. What does that really look like? And so changing narratives, elevating voices of people with lived experience, those are things that are so important to us. One of the challenges for us as the staff of ENTF is we don't provide direct service, so we don't have that intimate connection
yeah.
with people who are experiencing
It's a little
crisis.
more higher level.
Yeah, exactly.
You almost get that information third party.
Exactly,
Right? Like
yeah.
this person said this is an issue for them.
Right, right.
Okay.
So we're hoping that over time we can build the frequency that we're interacting directly with residents, and that's an intentional effort on our part.
Yeah.
At the same time, when we're working with organizations, we're really talking about the ways in which they engage with folks.
Totally.
Is it relationship based? Are they utilizing input when they're planning their services? Do they include people with lived experience in their budgeting, in their program design, in their boards?
Yeah.
And those are the things that we not only need to be doing ourselves, but we need to help and support those organizations that we work with to build capacity and to understand both the discomfort and the value of doing those things.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, because those are the things that start to change the dynamics of power and start to change the focus from immediate need to systems work.
Right.
Totally. And as you're saying this, I think about like, that's probably one of the most difficult things we all face is how do we just reach this voice of somebody who has these needs, like the truest form of the person that we're trying to address these needs for. And I think a lot of it is unfortunately fear-based in our societies. We don't really know how to approach people sometimes. We don't know how to ask them about their hardships, and sometimes they don't want to talk about it anymore too. So it's this like interesting blend of being willing to put yourself into really intentional and difficult work, and then also, like you said, making sure that you're not the only one, maybe, because you can have conversations with maybe 10 people in a day, but like, can 10 organizers have 10 conversations in housing or in food or in other places?
Yeah.
That could be so much more effective for your feedback down the road, or for everybody's feedback.
Right, right. I really appreciate what you said about being uncomfortable or kind of the fear behind those genuine interactions. I think that's so important. None of us, most of us,
I love
put it
seeing
that
you
way.
think about this for
Most of us wouldn't come out and say, I love being in uncomfortable situations, right? Like, we might be very willing to put ourselves in uncomfortable situations, and we may value or we may understand where that takes us as a human, especially with our own, like, critical thinking and with our own problem solving and, like, what it builds in terms of being your truest self. Like, being in an uncomfortable situation is important for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But given the choice, a lot of people would be like, I'm good, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which
So-
is why that's an uncomfortable thing, right?
Right,
Because it's like not appealing.
Yeah, exactly. They don't want to be in that moment. And part of it, I think, is stigma, because they've heard a lot of stereotypes. And
Totally.
they don't know how to handle those stereotypes, or they don't know a way of connecting and, like, recognizing that there's some there are some shared values, or there are some shared commonalities.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so when we think about those vulnerable conversations, it's not only listening to that other person and being able to understand one's role in how that person ended up in that situation. But it's also then being able to say, I have something to share that isn't a transaction with you. It's like that willingness to say, I'm going to walk alongside you, or I'm going to reconnect at some point in the future. That's scary for folks too, because it means that you're holding yourself accountable for
Totally.
something. And, like, what if I fail? What if I am not able to provide a service to them that I thought they needed?
Yeah.
Then I become this
The one
kind of fly by
disappointed,
night.
or something.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, there's Wendy.
Yep.
She
told me
totally
she was gonna
lied
do
to
this,
me.
and she failed me.
Right. And that hurts. And that's hard for everybody. And nobody wants to be in that position of one, discomfort in a space where you don't typically find yourself. And then two, failure. Like, we're all avoiding the big F, right? Like, that's the one that we just don't ever want to admit or feel or see. But I think the ones who win are never afraid to fail. And I think that's the part of it, right? Like, if you're afraid of losing, you cannot win, because that fear is going to block you from even trying.
Yeah.
And so I just really do appreciate you for even saying that. I think I share a lot of commonalities with a lot of people in this city who are facing a lot of things that I've never even had to come close to. And I could personally be much more open about having those conversations and about how I'm going to utilize that information. And I think we all do have this very pretty blanket to help us pretend like we don't know how to have these conversations with people.
Yeah.
And we're people.
Right. Right.
And that's just what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is.
Yeah, dignity.
I like
Yep.
your shirt.
Right. Yeah.
It could be as easy as that. So I appreciate you for even
Yeah.
reminding us of that.
So I was looking at, you mentioned committees earlier,
Yeah.
and I checked your website, and it looks like you actually have a number of committees.
We do.
I'll read them off just in case you don't know them off the top of your head, but they are digital inclusion.
They're like
econo-
the back
And you're
of my
pulling this
hand.
off of what?
ENTF website.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to make sure people-
Economic and workforce development, energy efficiency, food and nutrition, transportation, and Kent County Food Policy Council.
Yes.
Like, these are all your focus areas. Do you have a favorite?
Oh gosh, no, definitely not.
Oh, okay.
It's funny because we have like varying participation in each of the different committee areas. There are a different number of organizations that address these different service areas too. If you think about workforce development, there are a lot of organizations that provide job training or that provide connection to employment or that provide certifications or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
So we can draw from a lot of different sectors to build a workforce development committee that is pretty robust and that has a lot of different perspectives. And then we have the Energy Efficiency Committee as an example,
Yeah.
where if we only rely on the organizations that provide services for utility assistance, it's a really small number.
Yeah.
Because utility assistance comes from a very specific
sliver.
stream of funding from the government. And so there aren't very many organizations that can provide utility assistance.
Right.
But then we have to start thinking about, okay, what is energy efficiency really about? It's about utility assistance, yes.
Right.
But how do we get at the root causes for utility assistance? Well,
Right.
income is one area, right? Because we have to think about, can people afford their utilities?
Yeah.
So it's income, it's affordability from the rate side of things. How are utilities constructing and determining their rates?
Right.
It's about
Which is kind of made up.
yeah, exactly. So it's how rates are determined. It's how it's the condition of the home. How effective and efficient are the appliances? How is the
True.
wiring in the home? How is the home weatherized? Is it a single family home? Is it a multifamily apartment complex?
Yeah.
What is the exterior of the home environment and how that impacts
Okay.
utilities?
Yeah.
So there are a lot of different things that can play into exploring systems issues that really aren't at the surface level, that we have to dig a little bit deeper to really not only comprehend, but then to be able to impact.
Yeah.
Because then you get into like the regulatory side of things. And, there's legislative work, there's regulatory work, there's funding work.
No stricter
budgetary-
than federal.
Exactly.
All of these things.
So, yeah, so there are a lot of different, like each system is really intriguing in its own way.
Yes.
And I would say, the people who work in the different systems are all passionate people, but they, most of the time, they're focused on their system.
Yeah.
So what's
Very,
nice
like,
for me,
pigeonholed, yeah.
exactly. What's nice for me is I get to take a step back and I'm like the ultimate generalist, right?
Okay,
Like
yeah.
I don't have to specialize in any one particular area.
Yep.
But I do need to understand how all the different areas are connecting with one another.
Yep.
Like what are the intended and unintended consequences of decisions that are being made in each of those different areas?
Yes.
So
Like, how does transportation impact how people are going to get food down the line?
Exactly.
And then how does, like, the efficiency of that transportation going to impact the neighborhoods that it goes through?
exactly.
And, like, a lot of people don't have hands in on a lot of that.
Right. So it's interesting being able to have like the variety of different connections that we have. Like I really appreciate that we're engaged with so many different organizations, so many different people like yourselves who are like in the community organizing and really exploring like what are the differences in need that are nuanced,
Yeah.
that need to be brought forward so that solutions can be nuanced appropriately as well. So yeah, no particular committee is a favorite. Obviously, I have my long-standing experience in workforce development.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I said before, pretty much everything comes down to income to some degree. So workforce development fits kind of that area.
Yeah.
But they're
Right.
all so fascinating. Like everybody eats, everybody loves to eat for the most part. So
Yeah,
the food
so it's like
system
when you
is
food,
fascinating.
nutrition,
You
of
know,
course.
it's wonderful.
Well, and there's so many jobs in food. There's so many systems to get people the assistance that they might need there. That's
Yeah.
so cool.
Yeah.
I never think about any of this. I'm going to be honest. You don't really think about like how we develop the people who are working these jobs to get people services.
Yeah.
Like that's
So
a
let me
job in
tell you-
itself.
Right. Let me tell you a little bit more about our action areas.
Yeah. Let's hear it.
So these, I mentioned connecting before. These are kind of the areas that we really focus on in terms of, you know, what's ENTF's role in the community, right? What's ENTF's role with all of these organizations? So connecting is one of those. We have a data and understanding, which is another one of our areas. So in this area, we focus on kind of two core things. We focus on building capacity for organizations themselves. So when an organization is exploring either external data, so like census data or, you know, other like labor data, anything
Yeah.
like that, when they're exploring data, do they understand what it means to their constituency
Yeah.
and how they could potentially impact that? So there's that kind of competency. It's also looking at their internal data. So if they're exploring like gathering community voice, or if they're exploring the outcomes of the programs that they provide, or any of those types of things, do they feel confident in how they collect data, in understanding the data, and then in reporting out the data? So we work
Yeah.
a lot on
Okay.
the capacity side of things when it comes to data.
Yeah. And that like runs the world. So very
Right,
important.
right.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to know the numbers. Well, not everyone. Then there's the other side of that, of course, is the stories. Like stories are data. We don't
Yes.
talk about them in that way,
Yeah.
but they really are. And so the story gathering and the story sharing is such an important piece to data competency. So we work a lot with organizations on that as well. Then we work on some collective research. So when we think about like all the different organizations in the community that provide food access services, how are they structured? What types of services are they providing? How do they incorporate community voice? What types of outcomes do they see? All those types of things. So we gather organizations together and conduct studies on their organizational practices, or we look at, are there some shared outcomes that where we can define the data point the same way in order to gather that data from multiple organizations and then determine how effective the system is
Yeah.
in meeting community need. So we conduct some shared data projects as well
Yeah.
as doing the capacity building at an organizational and community level.
That's so cool.
So that's our data and understanding area. Then we have our action and advocacy area.
Okay.
So in action and advocacy, we again have a capacity building component. So, you know, talking with organizations, providing workshops on what does advocacy look like and why are people so afraid of being involved in advocacy? You know, what is it that throws up the red flag or makes the hair on your back of your neck stand up, you know,
Yeah.
when people talk about advocacy? Well, in a nonprofit world, people often are told that they can't advocate. They can't lobby.
The
There's a lot of
C3,
nuance
C4,
in that.
yeah.
Yeah. Like they really can do a lot more than they think they can do. But they're afraid of it because it's unknown, because
Yeah.
it risks how they're perceived, whether it's
Yeah.
by their supervisor or whether it's by community or whatever the case may be.
By funders too, most likely.
And
yeah.
funders, yeah. And they think it might be a little bit more complex and they don't know enough to be able to do it.
Yeah.
So we host some different workshops and host discussions around how to advocate effectively, how to build
That's
an advocacy
awesome.
campaign,
Yeah.
how to work with peers across the community in order to create shared messaging, in order to support something that's happening either budgetarily or legislatively. We provide a lot of action alerts or like advocacy opportunities where we're saying, hey, this thing is going to be discussed at the state legislature.
Okay.
You know, here's a way to get involved.
Nice.
Or,
Okay.
you know, here's something that that's being brought forward at county commission. Here's a way to get involved. So that's one of our other functional areas.
Yeah. Wait, is that you said that's open for like nonprofits and organizations, or is that open to individuals
Anyone
who want to
who
learn
is
how
interested.
to advocate also?
Very
Okay.
cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's definitely something that happens
More with
sporadically.
organizers, yeah.
Well, I would say, it's not like an ongoing thing. Like we
Okay.
don't say every 3 months we're going to hold this training because we partner with other organizations for those too. We can't hold all the expertise. So, for example, in our advocacy training, we do a lot of partnership with Michigan League for Public Policy. So
Okay.
we're hosting something. We talk it up, get people registered. They conduct the training, and then once the training is completed, then we work with the organizations on, okay, where do we go from here? What's the next step?
Okay.
So a couple of examples of local things that we've been involved in lately around advocacy. So another one of my peers, Janelle, who leads our Kent County Food Policy Council, she and I attended the Grand Rapids Public Schools board meeting where the students were coming forward and making their public comment around the various demands for the GRPS school system, specifically around food and mental health and facilities. So
we
we
were there.
provided, yeah, you were there, yeah. So we provided a letter of support for the student organizers.
Yay.
We, we were there to give them encouragement when they were there, kind of say hi, make eye contact, high
Yeah.
fives, those kinds of things.
Yes.
Similarly, Kent County's Department of Public Works had a working session a few weeks ago to discuss the waste to energy plant that's being proposed.
Yeah.
So the whole concept here is how can we generate more energy out of all the things that are community wastes, right? All the
Yeah.
garbage per se. And how do we ensure that we don't have to construct another landfill
Yeah.
that would have
Yeah.
environmental impacts indefinitely into the future, right?
Or maybe not making sure that we're not building that in a frontline community, right? Just,
Exactly.
put it out somewhere where it's not going to hurt anybody.
Right.
Yeah.
So we did the same thing again. We provided public comment. We were there at that working session. We provided public comment, just describing why it's important to us as the Food Policy Council, as the Essential Needs Task Force, what impacts would occur with landfill versus the positive impacts that could occur with a waste to energy plant and all the
Right.
complex of businesses that would surround that
Yeah.
plant. So, we do get involved in some kind of hyper local advocacy. But then we're also involved in state level and national level advocacy as well. So things like
Yeah, 'cause
federal
some things are like
LIHEAP
beyond the
funding.
city, or beyond the county. So you're gotta
Absolutely.
take it one notch up. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and some part of advocacy is even just education. So educating people on, like you said, this is why we want to do that. You don't just want to say, hey, we're going to do this.
right.
We think this is great. Thank you. It's like, no, we think this is great for this reason, and this reason. But we also want to be able to support what you want and what you need by educating you on our reasoning for it. And then kind of hearing what you have to say.
Yeah, exactly. What matters to you? And is there a policy issue or is there a budgetary issue that can impact what matters to you? And if not, can we bring one forward?
Yeah.
Which
Like,
is
what do you care about?
really
Yeah.
complex. Yeah. But if there's something that we can make a tie to, if we can say, well, there's a group like DHHS is working on this issue. If we can advocate with DHHS and with our lawmakers,
Yeah.
then maybe that can be something that has more
Yeah.
support in the upcoming budget. Those
Prove
types
a
of things.
community need.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Let's see. So, okay, I'm
Advoca-
going back to the beginning.
Yeah, so you did advocacy, you did workforce development.
Data.
Or data.
Yep.
And
And
you
then
do workforce
connecting.
development.
Data
Yeah.
and learning, yeah.
So we have them categorized in kind of two areas. We have our systems, our 5 systems, and then the 6 committees that convene in those systems. And that's where it's like workforce development, energy efficiency, transportation,
Okay,
food
so
and
the
nutrition.
committees are separate than
and
like
digital
your focus
inclusion.
areas.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah. The
got it.
committees are the systems areas, and the action areas are the functions.
Got it. Okay.
So we do all the functions in all the different in all the different
okay.
systems.
You kind of run those through each one.
right.
Almost not like not like DEI, but how you're supposed to use DEI.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
like,
they're,
okay,
like,
are we
cross-cutting.
checking all of these boxes through advocacy? Are we checking all of these boxes through communication?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. That sort of thing. So then our last action area is community learning. And so what we have found is that a lot of people who are providing direct service, or a lot of people who are in kind of like the not necessarily decision making, but like the procedure writing level of local government.
Yeah.
A lot of those folks don't have much opportunity to connect with one another and to learn from one another. So like
Yeah.
professional development types of things. So it's not necessarily like CEUs where they're extending their credential, but it's more along the lines of like peer learning and what's going to be effective on a day-to-day basis. What's
Yeah.
going to help me be more effective in doing my job. So we do some community learning that are focused on understanding emerging issues within a system, or understanding how issues are impacting other systems.
Yeah.
So, for example, we don't focus on criminal justice or the criminal legal system, but we do, or we have provided webinars on clean slate legislation and
Yeah.
how that impacts housing and how it impacts workforce.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
We've had webinars on community engagement. You know, what are effective ways, and so we'll bring in a panel of organizations who do community engagement really well and talk with them about like, you know, what are your practices? What have you learned along the way? What would you
would love one of those
recommend to
webinars.
other people? Yeah. So we use our community learning aspect as a way for frontline folks and for leadership to learn more about a topic that might cross their minds, and also to learn more about how they can be more effective in their work.
Yeah. Okay.
Through the lens of somebody else's work or experience.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or
Yeah.
expertise. Yeah.
Yeah. I like that a
Yeah.
lot, especially because it's just so hard to learn through your own experience every single time. Sometimes just listen to people who've already done it.
Yeah.
I've been learning a lot about just like listening to the ideas that people have already kind of tried to implement. Sometimes we all think we have the best ideas in the whole world.
Yeah. I had a friend once that said, know what you know people who know what you don't know, and then you'll never not know.
Nice.
And I feel like that's always
I
like
like
stuck with me.
that.
Ooh, I'll have to stick that on my forehead somewhere.
Little mantra for the day.
Yeah, no kidding.
But I feel like that's like the theme for like kind of like this episode, and kind of like what this like what the ENTF does is like really just like knowing people who know what you don't know, and then you'll always have somebody who knows what you need to know, and then
Yeah.
like that's
Yeah.
like a really cool
And
kind
that's
of
why
like
I call
networking.
myself the like ultimate generalist, right? I don't need to
Yeah.
know all the ins and outs of every single system.
Yep.
But if I know who the experts are, I know who the people are with lived experience, I know how to connect people with one another. Like those are the important things. And knowing the power structures are really important too. Like where
yeah.
can you
Of
leverage
course.
relationships? Because if you don't know who has the influence to change something, then you might be spinning your wheels and wondering like, why aren't they listening to me? Well, they might not be the right person.
Yeah.
Like they might not have any control. So
You might not be having the right conversation with them.
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
And like I would love a study of power structures also, because I mean, you know, with doing this work, we are doing a lot of advocacy, and I feel like sometimes it's really, you know, like I mean, I took political classes like in college and high school and everything, but now it's like, okay, how does it work in the real world? And then that's something
Yeah,
that
and
wanna learn
I'm
also.
learning a lot about how all local and state government can operate so differently. Like ordinances are not the same across board from Grand Rapids to Ann Arbor to Traverse City.
Right.
They're just not the same. And so we're all kind of working with our own set of regulations or our own set of boundaries. And so to your point, Nancy, yes, you can take these classes and learn about it, but until you get in depth about the system specifically that you're working with, a lot of that knowledge might just be like I almost call it not elementary, but it almost feels elementary. Like my perspective on what I know about how laws are created and who changes them and how to get that done versus like, our city manager system in Grand Rapids. Like, that blew my mind when I learned it. I didn't realize that could even be a thing. And so it's just so important to have that knowledge, or to know people who have that knowledge. So yeah.
Yeah. And that's networks are so important, because it's knowing the people who have that knowledge, or knowing who you can contact if you have a question. That's so, like, one of my personal reminders to myself is, like, always go back to who can help find the answer.
Yeah.
Like, I don't need to know everything, but if I can find people who know the answer and I can connect them to one another, like, those are the keys to resolving situations and to leading to change, like being creative with one another. So, those are some of the important aspects of my work, and part of why I love this work is because I have that amazing opportunity to sit down and talk with folks like you, to learn from what others are experiencing. I find myself really fortunate. But I have to say, like, I'm on a journey too. And one of the things that we as a team, and I mentioned this earlier, we as a team and we as our committees are continuously talking through is what are the things that we forgot to consider.
Yeah.
What are the experiences that are not voices in the room? Or what are the circumstances that occurred that we didn't anticipate, that are posing some type of negative impact? And how do we sit with that, acknowledge it, and then make change that doesn't make it about ourselves?
Right.
And that's so hard. It's difficult to feel
like maybe you find like the perfect solution, but then you're like, oh, but then there's a side effect that might cause more harm than good, or something. Yeah.
Right. Being able to uplift other people's ideas is much more important than having an idea that's a winning idea for myself.
Yeah.
And that's why you're the great person for this job. But really, because there are some people who have a more egocentric view on what some of their successes might be. So like you being able to see somebody else's success as your success as well might be really beneficial to our community in a way that, would serve further. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
So, I mean, you kind of already talked about the scope of ENTF, but what are some of the goals that you have for these committees, like all the different like working committees?
Yeah. So if I think about ENTF's mission and vision as a whole, ultimately what we want to do is ensure that all residents of Kent County have equitable opportunities and equitable outcomes.
Okay.
So when
That's
you think
a
about
big one. Oh, you're like, just some
no big
equity.
deal.
Just
Something
equity.
light.
So bear in mind, this is generational work.
Yeah, right.
Multi-generational work.
Yes.
It's not going to happen in my lifetime. But this is also where we need to recognize and be able to celebrate but not be satisfied with incremental change.
Yes.
So, we're all on this journey, we're all working toward things, and we do see setbacks, but when we can see a marked difference, when we can like hear a narrative change and recognize like, oh yeah, they get it now. Like they used to talk this way. Now they're talking that way. They see the systems work. They see the vision for how the community can be better and the community can thrive together. So those are some things that we, try to celebrate. So when we think about, what does it mean to have equitable opportunities and equitable outcomes? So for, let's talk a little bit about the Energy Efficiency Committee in the utility assistance.
Our favorite.
Of course. So, in the utility system, there are a couple things we want to think about. We want to make sure that there's utility assistance available with no restrictions. Like we want to reduce the eligibility caps.
Oh,
they're
so outdated, aren't they?
They really are.
Well, they're financial, right?
They're financial caps, yeah. So it's a limit to how much assistance people can receive, and of course there are thresholds for their income levels in order to be eligible to receive that assistance. So
and
we
these
want
are poverty levels, correct?
So sometimes, most of the time with utility assistance it goes by FPL. So it might be 150% of FPL, or it might be 175, or during COVID they raised it a couple times so that more people were eligible for assistance.
FPL is federal poverty level.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just want to make
Sorry.
sure we all throw terms around all day. So I just want to make sure people know
that
what
our
that means.
listeners know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I totally get it. So in our work within ENTF and really with a lot of organizations across the community and some government entities are starting to capture this terminology too, we look at what's called the ALICE threshold. So ALICE stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, and Employed. So if you think about the number of people that live in poverty, in Kent County right now, there are about 10% of the population that lives in poverty.
Oh.
But then you have the working poor, right? That category of folks who are employed, but they're struggling because their employment isn't meeting their financial obligations, right?
Well, and our poverty level is set at like a ridiculous
amount.
rate.
Yeah.
So poverty is subjective.
Yes. Even though the government makes it very objective, it really is subjective. Yeah, the concept of it is subjective.
Yeah. When
So-
Pat refers to that as underemployed. But yeah, go on.
Yes, underemployed. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the working poor is kind of the old terminology.
Yes.
So like Gen Xers, boomers, us old folks, we
You said it.
hold on to that stereotype,
Yeah.
which is really unfortunate because labels are so damaging.
Yeah.
But you're right, people who are underemployed.
But working poor is, I feel, it describes the issue, right? Like these people are working, but they're just underpaid, so they're just not getting ahead. But yeah, they are the
Underpaid.
working poor.
Exactly.
But anyway, go on.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for the acknowledgement. So when we think about people who live in this category, about 23% of people living in Kent County are in that category. So really, when we think about people's ability to meet their essential needs to survive in our community, we're talking about 33% of the population
Yikes.
that
Okay.
falls
Third.
below that threshold. Exactly. Now, I want to give a shout out to United Way because United Way Worldwide is the organization that developed this concept of ALICE.
Okay.
So locally, Heart of West Michigan United Way,
Yeah.
who happens to be my fiduciary agent, my employer of record. They're great people to work with.
Okay.
They provide the ALICE data on a regular basis.
Okay.
There was just a new ALICE report that came out a couple months ago. There's going to be a webinar coming up soon to explain the new ALICE data. But some organizations and some governments are starting to recognize like, we need to talk not only about people who are in poverty, we need to talk about people who are in ALICE as well.
Because it is a third of the people living in this city.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's only with housing, or is this with energy, or what is this covering?
So this covers all areas of basic needs.
Okay, so this is
So
food,
it's
this is housing.
food.
Is education included in that?
I believe education, childcare. Well, education is kind of seen as a public,
Yep.
like a low cost thing, but early child development.
Yep.
So that would be included. Healthcare, transportation, all of those kind of basic needs areas.
Yeah.
So when we think about that calculation, and that's Kent County overall, the percentage is higher if you're looking directly at the city of Grand Rapids.
Okay.
Oh, really? So
Yes.
we're sick within the city limits? Okay.
It is worse within the city limits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
'Cause I'm
and
sure
it's
probably
worse
neighborhoods
even-
like Rockford and, I don't know,
Right.
Jenison or something probably bring those averages up, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So the great thing about the ALICE report is it does break out all the different cities and townships within a county. So you can see Kent County as a whole, and then you can see like Algoma Township and Cascade Township and Rockford and Wyoming and Kentwood and
Yeah.
et cetera.
Is this accessible to people?
It is.
Okay, so we can find this on United Way's website?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yep. If you go to the Heart of West Michigan United Way website and put in Alice in the search tab,
It's
it'll
my
take
grandma's
you.
name.
I love the name too.
It's such a good name.
It'll take you to the most recent report, and then you can just dig through. And like I said, they're going to have a webinar coming up to kind of walk people through what it means to our community, what has changed over time. So they do their data analysis every few years, so you can see kind of, over time what's changing, what's getting better, what's getting worse.
Yeah.
But getting back to energy efficiency, so
Okay.
talking about kind of the goals. So one goal, of course, is making sure that there's enough utility assistance and that it's easily accessible. So that's kind of the baseline, right? That's the crisis resolution piece.
Right.
But then we want to look at energy efficiency in the home. So like I was saying before, like what resources are available for people to upgrade their appliances, for making sure that their home is weatherized or even has basic repairs so that there aren't negative impacts from their utility utilization. We want to look at things like affordability. So are the rates affordable for them? Do they have the income to pay what's considered affordable? Because there's a difference between something being deemed affordable, but then actually being able to afford what is considered affordable, right?
Yes.
And then we want to look at things like what's the reliability and the quality of the utilities? How accessible are the accounts for whether it's homeowners or renters or whatever situation a person happens to be in? And then potentially what are the ways that we can impact all of those areas through our advocacy?
Right.
So, there are a bunch of people in our local ENTF Energy Efficiency Committee who also participate in a statewide advocacy group called the Coalition to Keep Michigan Warm. So that works on statewide policy around both regulatory issues and rate issues and funding, like assistance funding issues for the state budget, things like that. We provide advocacy opportunities for the national level because that's where what's called LIHEAP, so low income home energy assistance program, LIHEAP.
Nice. Okay.
So
got all the acronyms.
that is up for discussion every single year with the federal budget. So we focus on signing on to advocacy at the national level for utility assistance, but then it also impacts things like weatherization funding. So Department of Energy has a separate pot that they put toward weatherization. And then how can we make sure that the processes are in place locally so that there are enough people, enough organizations, and enough of a labor force that can do home inspections, that can help with home remediation if a home is being deferred because there are some repair issues that need to happen before the weatherization can take place. Are there enough contractors to conduct weatherization for homes? And does the family have confidence and trust in all of those people that are coming in and out of their house?
That's a big one.
This is exactly what we're talking about with the CAP, right? This is exactly those things that we're talking about, is the amount of time it's going to take to do these things. Who's going to do the work? How much does it cost? And all of that. And then do we have trust to go in and out of people's homes, to get their data, to share that, but without sharing anything more, without raising their rent later, because we've done all of these great things to this home and now the value of it is higher. And then, is it going to be a renter? Is it going to be a homeowner? We know in Grand Rapids we have a large disparity between the homeowners and the landowners and where they might occupy.
Right. Who becomes eligible for the service if there's assistance available, but who also needs to sign off on it. And oftentimes with things like weatherization, it's the tenant who's the person that's deemed eligible based on their income. But the homeowner has to sign off on, I'm okay with someone coming in and doing these things to this property that I own. But their income doesn't play into the eligibility for it. So, having communication around all those parties. So like I said before, we don't provide the direct service, but we're working with all the different organizations that have a different role in those processes and making sure that they have good communication, that they have a workflow that makes sense, helping to sometimes it's as simple as saying, oh, you need to meet this new person at this organization because who you used to talk to turned over. And so there's someone new there now. Just kind of keeping those partnerships open and really nurturing the relationships so that those who are most impacted have the smoothest possible path. Now, like I said, this is multi-generational work.
Of course.
So there are lots of lessons that we learn along the way. Sometimes we run into a roadblock where we think something should be really easy and it's actually not because somewhere down the line, someone said, oh no, there's this requirement. And then we have to do some digging and figure out how we can, work around that or whatever. So it's complex work and everyone has their own job on top of being involved.
I'm sure.
So capacity is always an issue. And the pace of change is slow when you're
Yes.
dealing with folks who have an interest in being involved, but they might not always have the time, or maybe they don't always have the support from their home organization to be able to be deeply involved in specific work groups or action teams on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So sometimes things happen really slowly.
I mean, the wheels of government do turn very slowly, to be fair.
Yeah. And
Well,
and
until
sometimes
they
it's that
turn
way.
really, really quickly. And then
Yeah.
you're like, oh, wow, that had wheels.
Yeah.
No way.
Who knew?
No, it's super cool. As you're just saying this, it kind of reformats the idea of equity, right? Like, equity is not making sure that people who are living in poverty get money for their energy bills down the road. Equity is making sure that there is an Alice, making sure that there is people connecting to the proper services and not just saying, oh, you need a house, you go here. Goodbye. You know,
Right.
it's you need a house, but is it affordable? Do you have the correct job in order to be able to afford that? Do you have the correct education behind that job in order to keep you afloat?
And
Can
once
you
you
afford the
have the job-
food in your home?
Yeah. Like, what do you know about upkeep? And how
Yeah.
can we build community so that you have a natural support system
Yep.
and you don't feel like you are constantly being tossed around from organization
Yes.
to organization?
I like reformatting this idea of equity and how we give people services and then what it means to individualize their experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll say there's another aspect that we haven't really touched on that we as ENTF do a lot of advocacy around, and that's how the organizations work with one another that has sometimes negative inadvertent impacts on people.
Yeah.
So when we, for example, when we think about the paperwork that someone needs to complete when they go in for services, you know, and wouldn't it be nice if you only had to complete paperwork once?
It would be really nice.
Yeah.
You know, if you didn't have to do a new set of intake forms. But we have such stringent privacy laws
Yes.
that's impossible. You know,
As a receptionist,
there are-
that's what I did for 6 years.
Yeah.
You cannot just share people's information. It's like
Right,
release
right.
of records and
That's
whether or
right.
not that's necessary. And
Yeah.
Right. And do they use the same terminology in their form so that you can transfer the information exactly the same
Yeah.
way? Or do they use a different label for a term and then you have to go back and say, oh, can you clarify if this actually means this? Like, did I get
Yeah.
this right when I transferred the records over? Those
Yeah.
types of things.
Yes.
So there's information sharing that's an important piece of that. There's also the aspect of like, how are we communicating with one another and how are we communicating with our constituents? So are we talking about people in a way that supports dignity and equity? Are we talking that way when we're in front of people and when we're not in front of people?
Yes.
You know,
Crucial.
are we upholding old narratives or are we shifting narratives so that we're lifting people up and providing opportunity rather than reproducing stereotypes or perpetuating stereotypes
Yeah.
that hold people back?
Yep.
How are we putting people in decision-making roles?
Yeah. that's a
You
good
know,
one.
and so there are a lot of things that that really focus on the interplay between organizations. And even when it comes to data collection or reports that we use to design, you know, what interventions might be appropriate, there are all kinds of different assessments or surveys that take place in our community.
Yeah.
Some of them are led by, you know, a small nonprofit. They just want to survey their neighborhood or
Yeah.
their, you know, the people that they're serving. Some of them are led by larger institutions. Kent County Community Action just completed their community needs assessment. They're required to do that every 3 years.
Ooh.
So they
Sounds like a big
conducted.
project.
It is a big project, and the report is great. There's a lot of really good information in it. At the same time, the Kent County Health Department is required to do a community health needs assessment every 3 years. So, you know, one of the things that we do is we open up these paths of communication between community action and the health department to talk about, you know,
Right.
what are some shared data points or how can you leverage one another's work so that we're not over surveying the community.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, how can
Because
we
then that's like work for the community too, right?
Exactly,
Yeah, and it's just like very
exactly.
extractive.
Right, right. And that's data that they own, right? It's information about them that they have no control over once it goes
Yeah.
into that survey or once the focus group, you know, is completed.
Yeah.
So how is the data being used then to provide recommendations for future work. You know, if you're gathering information through a survey or through a focus group, are you then going back to community with the results to say, what should we do with this? Like, what's our
Right.
next step?
Or is it
you
just
lead
for a
us.
spreadsheet?
Right, right, exactly. So we get very involved. We really appreciate the partnership that we have at some of those small, you know, single nonprofits and some of those larger ones like Community Action, like the Health Department, because we can draw in some of those ideas and help with implementing or even establishing new strategies
Right.
for community-driven solutions. The Community Health Improvement Plan, or the CHIP, as it's known.
Cute.
I know, isn't it cute? That always comes after the community health assessment or
Right.
community health
Yes.
needs assessment. So there's a needs assessment, there's a report, and then there's a CHIP, the Health Improvement Plan. And so how can we help bring in organizations that are part of our network to be involved in the CHIP so that we're implementing strategies that community has already said, we believe these things are going to be most effective. Let's get involved. Let's support a bigger initiative. You know, let's be part of this project. And again, kind of hopefully reducing the number of times that we're asking for information from people, but then empowering them to be able to follow through on what their ideas and their visions are.
Yeah,
love
and reminding them that you took their data for a reason and that you're going to do something in community with that, so that the next time they do a survey, it's not just like, here's this, you know, quarterly survey, or this, you know, every third year, or whatever it may be.
Yeah,
I think it'll be
yeah.
more exciting. There's more liberation behind filling those things out when you know it's going to impact your community in a positive
Yeah,
way.
that's the hope.
That is a hope.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. How can folks get involved with KCENTF?
Yeah, so first of all, our website is entfkent.org.
Okay.
entfkent.org. And then for the Food Policy Council, we have a separate website. So that's kentfoodpolicy.org is the Food Policy Council's website. So we encourage people to explore the websites. Let us know what you're not finding on the website so that we can add it, because that's always important. We have newsletters for both of those groups. So for all of ENTF, we send out a weekly newsletter that has information for service providers, and it has information for service providers to share with their community members. So opportunities to be involved in a survey, for example, or a learning opportunity, or maybe there's like a one-day event that's happening somewhere in the community that can
like a
benefit
workshop.
others. Yeah, workshops, resource fairs, any of those types of things. So every week we have an ENTF newsletter that goes out that has all of that type of information. And then the Food Policy Council does a monthly newsletter with some updates on the work that they're doing. I didn't get into it, and I know we don't have time, but I just have to say the Food Policy Council is doing an amazing county-wide food system assessment and planning process right
I love
now.
food systems.
So, you know, get a hold of us if you're
Uh-huh.
interested in being involved in food system work, because it's so important. And
Yeah.
the food system covers everything from land use and growing and production and food access and food waste. So like the whole cycle of the food system.
Yeah.
So there's newsletters, websites, and then there are meetings. Our meetings are open to anyone, and we love people engaging in either a full committee meeting or an action team meeting or both. Our meetings on our website, there's an events page, and it's basically a calendar that has all of our meetings.
Ooh.
And
And
once
it's like color coded.
it's color coded, yes.
We love colors.
Once you attend a meeting, then we can get you on our regular list so that you get the calendar invitation, you know, in advance, and you always have it on your calendar.
Perfect.
Our meetings are mostly on Zoom, but we do some hybrid meetings. So about once a quarter, we'll do a meeting in the community, and you can choose to be there, either be in person or online for that as well. And they do occur on like
Monthly
a recurring
basis.
basis.
Okay, very nice.
So like first Thursdays or the second Tuesdays,
Very
or
cool.
you know, whatever. You can kind of plan them that way.
Yeah, so
Perfect.
from hearing this point, it would be a good idea to get looped in. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I guess what do we want our call to
Well,
action?
I want my call to action to be for people to go to the transportation committee meetings, which seem to be every last Tuesday of the month, or at least the ones that you can make it to, the energy efficiency committee meetings, and then hopefully see how we can be more sustainable in those areas especially.
A third of our emissions come from transportation, a third come from industry, and a third comes from the way that we heat our businesses and homes. So it is a really good idea to know about transportation and then to also know about energy efficiency and how your appliances or how we get our energy can impact your life further down the road.
Yeah. So check out the events, get involved, be an advocate for yourself and your community.
And then I would encourage people to, in the process, maybe consider their transportation ways, how they could make it more effective, either by driving more efficiently or less. And then the same thing with food. Food waste is a really large issue in our country, but also like food being sound in food and educated in it is so important. So
yeah, absolutely. Cool. It's been so much fun talking with you both,
yeah,
and I feel like
thank you for letting
there's
us
so
just
many
pick
more
your
things
brain.
that I want to talk about.
Oh,
and
I mean,
share.
it's so all encompassing, you know.
Yeah.
So
yeah, but I think I'm really excited for people to hear about how our systems work behind the scenes, and then also ways that they can get involved into those scenes themselves.
Yeah,
yeah. So thank you for being here so much.
The better.
We really do appreciate you for all the work you do, and also just for being here and having this conversation with us today.
If any listeners want to have questions or want to have any follow-up emails with you, how can they reach you?
So I can be reached at wrandall, RANDALL, at hwmuw.org. So wrandall at hwmuw.org.
What does the HWMUW?
Heart of West Michigan United Way.
Ah, okay. That makes it easier to remember. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wendy.
Don't forget, this was Green Rapids.
There you go.
Woo! All right. Peace.